that you keep we keep your microphone muted and to get a beverage and just relax and enjoy. Today we're going to try to lead with accessibility. So again, my name is Linda. I have black hair. I'm wearing glasses and a pink shirt. And with that, we're going to drop a PDF of our full slide deck into the chat. And if you have a screen reader, you can just follow along with us. Thank you again for joining.
Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you here for our high-level political forum on sustainable development side event. And on behalf of the panel and IFSW, I'd like to welcome everybody to social workers as stakeholders in co-building, promoting, and sustaining an eco-social world. I'd like us to highlight our presenters, our panelists today. And you will be meeting them, Rory Truell, Joaquin Mumba, Catherine Connolly-Wehrman, Hillary Weaver, and myself, Evelyn Tomaszewski. And we'll get to meet them and learn more about them as we progress. I want to take a moment briefly to talk about IFSW, for those who may not be familiar with the International Federation of Social Workers. We have 5 regions, as you can see on the slide, and representatives, we represent 5 million social workers in 146 countries. There are 5 commissions that are part of IFSW, and I'm a member of the United Nations Commission, and we collectively created this program today as part of the UN High-Level Political Forum as a side event. So briefly, the Sustainable Development Goals. This is very central to the High-Level Political Forum, to the meeting, and very much enmeshed and central to what we're talking about today. The SDGs are 17 amazing goals that are unique, yes, yet cross-pollinate and interconnected. And the High-Level Political Forum, in addition to looking at COVID-19 and building back better, and promoting the 2030 agenda. The High-Level Political Forum in these next 2 weeks will focus and do an in-depth review on SDG 4, which is quality education, 5, gender equality, 14, which is life below water.
I want to go to that shitty meeting, but I got to do
on land, and 17, partnerships for the goal.
Because it talks about.
So I want to connect a little bit of this. SDG 4, education, SDG 5, eliminating gender disparities in education and ensuring equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, and children in vulnerable situations, certainly connect to our work. My role as an educator, I believe, is to ensure that all learners acquire the skills and knowledge to promote sustainable development, another part of the SDGs. SDG 5, which looks at equity. The Committee on Elimination of the Discrimination of Women put forth a couple years ago that gender-based violence includes violations of sexual and reproductive health and rights, which may also amount to cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And I bring up that example as a reflection of what's currently happening in the United States, and certainly what's happening and we're having to address across the globe. SDG 14 and 15, kind of connecting those. Climate change and its impacts, ranging from increasing sea levels, extreme weather events, and droughts, have already inflicted human rights harms on millions of people. This is from a report by the Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights. And then 17, partnerships, and we'll be hearing a lot about that. It really connects to who we are as social workers and allies. It talks about capacity building that increases access to relevant data that really reflects the communities that we work in, that we live in, that help us in our work. It speaks to self-determination, certainly part of something that we connect with as social workers. And it speaks to, I think, our role in civil society and the role of civil society in supporting and forwarding the SDGs, in supporting sustainable development. And I want to connect a little bit before we start, something that I've learned a lot about in this last year on talking with my students and in my class is the idea of rights holders and duty bearers. and that as civil society, as citizens, as social workers, I think in a sense we have a dual role for some of us. We are rights holders, that we're part of a diverse community. We're also part of a community that have inherent human rights. We're also members of civil society that we have a role, both as individuals and through our professional roles, social workers and allies, to hold governments accountable, public institutions accountable, and private sector accountable for their commitments. And this is language that's reflected in the IFSW policy statement on SDGs. And collectively, we're guided by our ethics and our values, that we take our role as duty bearers seriously in promoting human rights and ecological and social justice. For example, we do this through advocacy and through co-building resources that promote leadership and promoting, particularly around historically marginalized individuals and peoples. So I just wanted to make a connection before we began about our role, what we're talking about today, sustainable development, the SDGs, and how we connect as both rights holders and duty bearers and in our work. So as we do that, we're going to move into our agenda, in which we'll be hearing from our speakers. And to set the frame, we're going to hear from Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And this is from a speech that she gave through the Global People Summit, Co-Building a New Eco-Social World. And then we'll go to our panel, who's going to connect all this for us today. Linda, can you try again with sound?
Days, you, the people, have addressed these challenges, facing them with clear ideas, new perspectives, and an unrelenting commitment to the future. We have heard from artists. We have heard from students. We have heard from Indigenous women. We have heard from social workers. We have heard from public health officers, from social security administrators, from those who work in the green economy. In summary, we have heard from those at the front lines of the impact, and at the front lines of the solution. We have traveled to the fields where the battle for better future is being waged. And we have seen that despite the difficult circumstances, people are not giving up. The theme of this global summit, co-building a new eco-social world, leaving no one behind, could not be more pertinent. The United Nations is committed to being part of this building process. Our biggest contribution is our common roadmap, the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. In the last 2 years, meeting the goals of the 2030 Agenda, unfortunately, has become more difficult. But we must not waver. We have not gotten this far to only get this far. The road has winded, but the destination remains the same. Indeed, it is now clearer than ever why we need a more sustainable and inclusive world, a more eco-social world, because the alternative simply does not work. When 15, 20 years of progress are wiped out in the span of 6 months, as we saw in 2020 with the pandemic, in so many key social metrics, what this shows is that we were calling development something that simply wasn't. Only when we develop inclusively and sustainably can progress really be called progress. Everything else is just a mirage, a vision of the present at the expense of the future. Dear friends, the world is going through very testing times. but we must all feel empowered by the recognition that there is much each of us can do to help. We have seen that here in the amazing summit. Let's join forces and continue. The future is a common responsibility. So I thank you all for being here.
This is Linda. Evelyn, you are on mute.
Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Rory Troll. Dr. Rory Troll is the Secretary General for the International Federation of Social Workers, a role he's served in since 2011. He is a highly engaged and well-respected social worker working locally, nationally, and internationally. Dr. Troll will provide an overview and reflection on the Global People's Summit and the People's Charter. While originally from New Zealand, he is working now presently in Switzerland. Welcome, Dr. Troll.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Thank you. And it's really, really nice to see lots of familiar faces here. Lots of people who've really strongly contributed to the People's Global Summit and everything that came before it in terms of thinking, what role does social work need to play? What role do we need to play as citizens, as professionals, as members of communities in helping to shape change in our futures for everybody, a future that leaves no one behind. Particularly, I notice here in the audience, lots of people from the UN Commission of IFSW, and a big thank you to you, because you've, as a part of IFSW, you've played a tremendous role in helping facilitate this thinking across the social work profession, with many policy papers, with many webinars and guidance that you've provided. So thank you so much. The summit's finished, as we know, and I think many of us in this webinar today were a part of the summit. It's finished, but it actually starts something new. It starts an absolute new era where people have come together to think about how we need to work differently in order to make the advances in the world that we all identify. It sets a stage of new actors and driving forward the SDGs, driving forward development, and it sets a new era of how we work together. So it's quite a significant outcome, which is, as we saw from this wonderful video of Rebecca Greenspun, has been really strongly embraced by UN agencies, but also at this top pinnacle of diplomacy in the world, the Secretary General from Antonio Guterres, and the team around him, like Rebecca, who have totally and fully endorsed and committed to this process of co-building, recognizing new actors in development, very formally recognizing that communities, that people, and the responsibilities they take towards other people's rights is absolutely key as we move forward. Just in case not everybody had an opportunity to be a part of the summit, and there were many people that didn't, I'm just going to share my screen and just take us through just very quickly some of the developmental processes of how we came to such a significant outcome, and then I'm going to share what that outcome is just in the few minutes that I have. So on my screen here, we have the logos of the initiating partner organizations, and they include UN agencies, they include educational forums, they include green movements, they include policy groups, they include faiths, they include a whole range of people. And what happened early in the pandemic process was, and I'll just speak from a social work perspective here, but I think it applies to everybody. When the pandemic hit at the local level, at the country level and community level, there was no plan in place. There was no system for You know, how do we work with the public to protect for the public to protect themselves? How do we get services to the public? How do we manage lockdowns? How do we manage all of these things? And it created a context where certainly social workers, but also educators and doctors and all sorts of people that are involved with the public had to work innovatively and differently without policy. And it had been really difficult in many countries before the pandemic to pick up the phone and simply say, look, I'm a social worker working in a mental health team. I really want to speak to someone in education, or I really want to speak to someone in police, or I really want to speak to someone in the health services, because we need to do something in the community here. And when people tried that, they didn't get an answer because of the policy silos that separated us apart. And our funding silos, our policy silos, of which I think the professions also contributed to. We were a part of creating those silos in some ways. But under the pandemic, all of those silos had to be split aside. It was all hands on deck. And so people had to answer their phones. And we had people working in education, people working in social work, people working in health, people working in the police, people working in all sorts of different services saying, hey, we have to work together. We need to work together. And through those interactions, a whole set of conversations emerged. I don't think anybody planned them, but they all emerged. We found that we had a really strong common agreement that the public are the key actors, the communities are the key actors in keeping people safe. So under lockdown conditions, certainly governments might make a rule, but how it's enacted upon really comes back to communities, community leadership, community support systems. And so in various places in the world, community leaders needed to play a really strong role. Church leader, an elder, a respected person in the community needed to play a role of saying, hey, we need to practice social physical distancing. We need to keep each other safe. We need to also be aware of who might be a bit isolated, might need extra support, and how to access that support. And it was those sorts of interactions that all of these professions I mentioned really cherished and honoured. And so the conversations grew to starting off by saying, after the pandemic finishes, we must not go back to business as usual. There's a real opportunity for us to come through this pandemic really addressing many, many issues that affect all of those professions. The health profession was really critically concerned. They've been trying to get policy and governments to recognise the social determinants of health, and to invest in health promotion and addressing housing, poverty, overwork, lack of childcare. This is coming from our colleagues in health. They found good partners with social workers. They found good partners in all of the groups in doing this. And so as that conversation emerged, more people came involved, more people heard about it, more people wanted to be a part of this. Fridays for the Future, who've been really specifically focused at one point on environment, climate change, also recognised that people had a huge role to play in advocating for climate justice, but also they identified and connected that there are social justice issues for people. In the summit, more organisations came involved. We saw representatives from Black Lives Matter, we saw representatives from women's movements, we saw many representatives from Indigenous movements. And as we came together, we all made a commitment not to lose sight of the issues that we've started with, but to make the connections between those issues and other people's issues and the need to work together. And as you can see, UN agencies came on board too. So it was an incredibly exciting and unique experience. I think for the first time, I think it's fair to say that for the first time, we're social movements, professions, youth groups, the Commonwealth as a whole, governments, particularly governments that have already started to make shifts, and individuals made a commitment that we will not return to business as usual, that we need a world that is sustainable, we need a world that is socially just, and that we need a world that leaves no one behind. And everyone was able to make those links. So what we did in the summit, as those of you that were a part of the process, was to develop the People's Charter for an eco-social world. And it was a really beautiful experience. Even though there were many voices contributing to it, and even though every word was discussed in this charter and reflected upon, I think all the people involved feel confident with this charter. Their organisations have endorsed it. Many organisations actually, to my interest, have started to write to us to say that they've endorsed it. Just today, 2 universities that weren't involved with the process of this have heard about it, and they've said as a university they have endorsed this charter. So, the wording that we are able to end with is working for people.
Rory, you asked me to give you a prompt.
Okay, 3 minutes to go. One of the really key things to this charter is the first of all, we see it as a living document. We see it as more populations come involved, we'll add to the list of values that I've got on the screen here. The wording will expand and change because it needs to as more people become involved. It's a growing, living document and process. But what's really wonderful in this first version, this first charter, is that we're recognising philosophies from different parts of the world, different cultures. We have Buen Vivir, a very large Indigenous movement, started and anchored in Latin America. We have words that social workers will know and feel very a strong sense of: respect, dignity, harmony, social justice, diversity. We have Ubuntu, another Indigenous movement from Africa, and words that we know also: solidarity and so forth. We've agreed that these are the implications for our sustainable shared future, that we need to co-develop reciprocity. Reciprocity being forming equal relationships where people exchange, grow and learn together and share. And in a reciprocal relationship, you see the strength in the other person. This is not a one-way, top-down relationship. It's a reciprocal relationship. And in this summit, it was really highlighted. That's between us, the people in this room. It's between us and our government. It's between us and people of other cultures. And the respect that sits within those reciprocal relationships. It's a new formation, which is really different from the traditional aid development downward driven model. It's seeing the strength in communities, in people, and working through issues together. Co-building peace. You can read more about these, and I've only got another minute or so. Co-living with nature. And the charter really affirmed here to recognise the legal rights of nature, which many Indigenous communities throughout the world have already pioneered. In several places in the world, rivers, mountains have been given legal status to protect the dignity and integrity of those natural phenomena and resources. Co-creating social justice, again, with people, not for people, so that people are actually leading their own social justice and have space. Space is created for them to lead their own social justice and have an engagement with that, feel a sense of responsibility with that, rather than being told, this is how your social justice is going to be defined by others. And then co-realising equality, again, recognising the strengths in all parts of our community. We've developed in this charter 5 things that we can work on right now right now together. And that's the process that's unfolding in these days. Recognizing ecological integrity, I just discussed that a moment ago. Economic reform, instead of the world measuring GDP, measuring well-being societies. And there's already 4 governments in the world that do that. And many provincial governments on that track as well. So that movement has already started. International solidarity, helping the world shift from this focus of nationalism comes before globalism. There's a place for culture and a place for nationalism and a place for identity from where you come from. But in the context as being a global citizen and a global person. Rethinking work and employment to make sure that everybody feels valued at this time when work is going through such tremendous change right throughout the world. And in terms of government responsibilities, moving from government policies that are reactive after a crisis has occurred to helping communities to develop the resilience and the capacity to keep themselves safe, to manage those crises that they fall into. So the People's Charter is a start of a new era that's built on many of the movements that have come before. And the difference is that we are now working together. And as Antonio Guterres said, and as Rebecca Greenspan said, this starts a new era, a new change. And this is a new way for us to move forward together in these challenging times. So that's just a little bit about the Charter. Thank you for the time. I'm sorry if I went over it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Troll. And it was really important to go over that content. And the link is in the chat to absorb more and to reflect back on throughout the program. It's my honor to introduce Joaquim Mumba. He's the IFSW Global President and also serves as Chief Executive Officer of the Social Work Association of Zambia. He has worked in diverse fields of practice with international nonprofit advocacy and development organizations, and is committed to working with affected communities to bring about desired change through local level advocacy. He comes to us from Lusaka, Zambia. President Mumba will be speaking about Ubuntu as a philosophy, share examples of practices, and how change happens when communities feel empowered. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, and greetings to all the viewers that are following us. Greetings from the warm heart of Africa, from this land of the sun. For starters, I'll start by talking about the African proverb. And this is a very common proverb in Africa, which says, when you run alone, you run fast. And when you run together, that is as a collective, you run far. And this is simply not about what we achieved individually, or what we achieve individually, but what we achieve together. And the proverb actually, reflects a lot of several values about Ubuntu. And there's so many elements that are embedded in Ubuntu, the concept of Ubuntu. We can talk about issues of group solidarity. We can talk about love. We can talk about acceptance. We can talk about, sharing, issues to do with core responsibilities. All these and many other values within the concept of Ubuntu. Next slide, please. And then again, borrowing from the slide from Dr. Jacob Ngubare's presentation, he quotes Mbiti, African view of man. And Mbiti's view of man is that what happens to the individual happens to the whole group. And what happens, or whatever happens to the whole group happens to the individual. So the individual can only say, I am because we are. And since we are, therefore I am. And that is BT 1969. So yes, when we're talking about Ubuntu, we're talking about, the idea of collectivism, the idea of community, the idea of communal, kind of thing. But Ubuntu goes beyond the idea of collectivism. It goes beyond the idea of community living. It goes beyond the idea of, sharing. It talks much also about solidarity. And I'm very happy and excited that even having come from the Global People's Summit, the idea of international or global solidarity was paramount. And we see this in many aspects in terms of social work response. We see a lot of issues to do with solidarity. Former president of South Africa, that is Nelson Mandela, he talked about Ubuntu as having being pregnant with so many elements and several aspects, and some of those are the issues that I've highlighted: issues to do with solidarity, issues to do with social justice, sympathy, compassion, hospitality, and all these different things. So I just want to indicate here that let's not limit Ubuntu to, collectivism. Let us look at all these other different ingredients, which are also very important even to social work. In social work, we talk about social justice, we talk about interdependency, we talk about solidarity. So these are the critical issues that we need to start promoting and embracing as we move. Linda, kindly move to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. And while the degrees of these values and practices vary across different ethnic groups, they all point to one thing: the authenticity of individual, human being, is part of the larger and more significant relational, communal, societal, environmental, and spiritual world. And that is according to the African Journal on Social Work 2020. So, the issue of Ubuntu, much as we are saying that it is something that is coming from Africa, I see that Ubuntu is in every society, and probably it is identified using different terminology or different concepts. Having come from South Korea, I learned that there is a terminology that they use, which is actually equivalent to Ubuntu. There is the aspect of the idea of community relations, the aspect of solidarity, the aspect of supporting each other within the community. So it is, I think, found in different communities and societies, and it may not take the same shape, but there's certain elements and values that are being, that are considered in different societies. And I think that is very important to recognize, and also for social workers to build upon, even as we are looking at, the sustainable development goals going forward. The next slide, please. Not that one. I think you can go back a little bit. Okay, no, it's the same one. Please just go to the next. Yeah, and talking about Ubuntu, we can see that Ubuntu can also be used as a child protection approach. In Africa, a child does not belong to a family, or it does not really, belong to the nuclear family, but the child belongs to the community. So the whole community, has got the responsibility of taking care of or protecting the child. So if I'm walking along the street and I find this child being molested or this child, being abused, I've got the responsibility as an adult or as a member of the community to intervene and ensure that particular child, whether I know them or I don't know the child, I've got the responsibility to intervene and ensure that the child is safe and the child is protected. And that is very critical when it comes to Ubuntu. So Ubuntu can be used even when we are coming up with child protection interventions, and also ensuring that we strengthen and promote what is already happening in our communities in terms of protecting our children. Ubuntu would also be used as we are now talking about co-building an eco-social world. We see that it is very important to involve the community in whatever interventions that we are doing in order to ensure that those interventions are sustainable. Currently in my country, we've been talking so much about issues to do with cutting of trees. So as a means of a livelihood, so a lot of people go out in the forests, they cut trees, and they come up with charcoal, which is basically used as a source of energy for cooking and other things. But we see that the number of trees or the trees are being depleted, and for us to be able to intervene in that area, to ensure that our community members start preserving and even planting trees, there is a need actually for social workers to work with the community members, raising awareness and also introducing other sources or means of sources of energy, so that we can preserve the environment. So it's very critical and important that community members are involved. So in this case, we're talking about awareness raising. We're talking about, engaging community members as part and parcel of community development. And also Ubuntu is very critical when we're looking at it as a tool for social networking as well as social capital. We see that most of vulnerable people in communities are supported and assisted by their own members within the community. So there is actually a community, an inherent community response in responding to challenging situations, and also members of communities that are struggling. So these are some of the elements actually that needs to be promoted so that we ensure that solidarity within communities and within the society is promoted and supported, so as to ensure community members look after their own people. Next slide, please. I'll talk about the story which I talk about a number of times and several times. I think the slide is slightly up. So this story is really about misapplied development. And a few years ago, there was an NGO working in the rural part of my country, which embarked on a water systems project. And the project team entered one village and realized that cases of diarrhea were quite high in that particular community. But then without engaging members of the community to understand the underlying causes of the problem, the project team set out through a borehole in the middle of the village. And a few months later, the project team, from the same NGO, went back to the village to check if the diarrhea cases, were going down. And to their concern and surprise, the cases were skyrocketing, and community members were still drawing their drinking water from a stream located some kilometer away from the village. So asking community members why they were still drawing water from the stream 1 kilometer away from the village, where animals drank and the whole community washed their clothes and bathed, community members responded that walking a long distance to draw water was a kind of a therapy for women in the community. That was an opportunity for them, to talk about the problems they were going through, to share amongst themselves as they walk that long distance. It gave them time to chat and share their problems, and moreover, that their forefathers used to drink from the same stream and did not die of diarrhea. This and many other stories remind us that sustainable development requires a process of public understanding, participation, and agreement in order to achieve the results everyone seeks. So this really is very important because that borehole, which was sunk in the middle of the village, it couldn't serve the purpose that it was meant to serve in that particular village, because members of the community continued going out to draw water a kilometer away from the village, and also diarrhea cases kept on increasing. And for me, this gives me a reminder as a practitioner, as a social work practitioner, that it is very imperative, it is very important to involve the community. Community members need to be able to identify their own problems, the problems that they are going through. We need to avoid the top-down development plans, which are devoid of people participation. And such development plans do not bring about sustainable development. And also it's a reminder and a lesson that people should own the development agenda. So when people are involved, then it means that they will take ownership of the development agenda. Then development agenda.
Mumba, may we just ask you to sum up in a moment or two? That would be lovely.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
And development agenda should be informed by people's felt needs and should be, bottom up, a kind of a process. But also, yes, it can also be a top down, but ensuring that the voices of the people affected, included. And then also the aspect that we see is that external people came into the village as experts, without really ensuring that the community members had an input in identifying the problem that they needed intervention. So community members are real experts in this case, and they understand their struggles, they understand their problems. And then also the so-called experts responded to assumed community needs. So they just went there and assumed that these are the needs and these are the priorities and these are the interventions that need to be implemented in this particular community. So it's very important that we start looking at ensuring that community members have a voice in everything that happens. And also that community, external experts may consider what external experts may consider as the priority areas of need for the people may not necessarily be so by those affected. And I think I just wanted to highlight that all these, the lessons that we learned from these community interventions that happened in this village are very critical lessons that we need to keep in mind and ensure that we put Ubuntu at the center and ensure that community members participate in whatever we want to bring about in the communities to ensure that there is sustainable development and sustainable change, the change that we desire to see in these communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, President Mumba. I'm hearing clapping from the side. And we will be taking questions. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We have saved some time for the end. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Wehrman. Dr. Kathy Wehrman is the chair of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance Steering Committee and previous served as Coronavirus Information Officer for IFSW. She is an emeritus associate professor of social work at Illinois State University, where she served as the BSW program director. She also served as president for the U.S. National Association of Social Workers 2017 to 2020. She's joining us from Champaign, Illinois, in the United States. She'll talk about the role, briefly, of her role as a coronavirus information officer, highlight the various roles of social workers and other social service workforce members played in the midst of the pandemic. And she'll talk about through the work of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. She'll share some key discussion points from the People's Summit that related to the role of the workforce in humanitarian assistance related to the crisis, including climate-related events. Welcome.
Thank you, Evelyn. I'm really pleased to be here representing the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, and I'm happy that we were able to partner in the Global People's Summit. It was a tremendous event. Before I launch into my discussion of the Alliance, I wanted to say a little bit about my role as the IFSW Coronavirus Information Officer. This was back at the very beginning, 2020, when I was a member of the IFSW executive, and I was asked to take on this role for two primary reasons. One, IFSW wanted to be in a position to provide timely, credible information to its member countries' social workers and to monitor the spread of the virus in order to make a critical decision on whether or not to hold our general meeting in 2020 in person. Based on the rapid spread and the life-threatening nature of COVID, IFSW was able to pivot to a much safer approach, a move to a virtual format. And to that, I would say IFSW is a model of flexibility and adaptability and keeping people safe and yet carrying on with a very important meeting. Since my time in the role, I'm happy to note that many other resources have been developed by IFSW to support social workers around the world as they practice ethically in high-risk health contexts and have been on the front lines to see more new challenges emerge. Now I'll turn to discussion of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance perspective on the social service workforce as stakeholders in creating an eco-social world that really leaves no one behind. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know us, the Alliance is a network which unites its members across the globe in working to make sure social service workforce is well planned, developed, and supported in communities across the globe. We do it by bringing our 3,000 members across 148 countries together in a range of initiatives to try to advance shared knowledge and tools and to build capacity of colleagues and partners in both the humanitarian and development arenas. We also try to advocate for a stronger, better resourced, and better recognized workforce, and that's a key. Next slide, please. The Alliance's definition of social service providers includes not only social workers, but others who are focused on achieving similar objectives for their communities. As you can see from the slide, we define the workforce as including a wide range of both professionals and paraprofessionals. And paraprofessionals we include as being trained and tasked with a social service role to work alongside professionals, but not necessarily having a formal professional qualification. They may work as paid staff or volunteers. It's important to note our definition not only includes practitioners, but also researchers, managers, advocates, and educators. It also covers people in governmental and non-governmental roles at all levels, local, community, and national. All are stakeholders who are working at all of these levels. At the micro level, we have social service workers providing preventative and responsive services to individuals, children, and families. At the meso level, they're working with groups of people or across the community. Community organizing activities come to mind here. They also work at the macro level, nationally or internationally, to promote and advocate for the workforce and for the policies needed to achieve lasting changes in the lives of people and communities. The Alliance has worked with people at all these levels to try to support efforts to achieve social justice. One example, I could give you many more, but one example was our effort to actively engage in efforts to include convening a peer-to-peer learning mechanism for not just global experts, but social service providers to be able to meet regularly online and exchange lessons learned and innovation from some of their own efforts to plan and develop and support the social service workforce in their countries. Through their participation in the group, they have been helped to develop and implement national workforce strengthening plans and develop and share guidance for others in learning how to do so. Next slide, please. The Alliance sees the values of the social service workforce as being very much in line with those of the IFSW ethical principles and the values of the People's Summit. The same is true of how the Alliance itself endeavors to work with members of the workforce and the variety of other entities we collaborate with. We know that the workforce is on the front line, taking on many forms of social injustice, including poverty, discrimination, and violation of human rights. We know that the members of the workforce are especially critical in the situation of war, pandemic, and the climate crisis the world faces today. The workforce is mission critical in helping create an eco-social world where no one is left behind, where diversity is highly valued and inclusivity is honored and expected. These are values and ways of working that the Alliance practices in all of their efforts, and indeed in the spirit of Ubuntu. Next slide, please. If there is any question about the status of the social service workforce being a stakeholder, the next few slides will detail their roles across the challenges we face today and very likely into the future. Most recently, this includes COVID-19 and other major public health emergencies. In the slide, you can see the range of roles that the workforce has performed during the pandemic. These are examples that need to be widely shared to help amplify and recognize the vital role the workforce plays. Roles have ranged from direct assistance to advocacy to making care and support available online and by telephone, to ensuring that the most marginalized people and communities are still reached through home visits, community outreach, and so on. To help people and communities emerge stronger from the pandemic, these roles have included helping build the resilience of individuals, families, and entire communities. Keep in mind, COVID has devastated economies and livelihoods and pushed millions into extreme poverty. It's fueled violence and social injustice. And the workforce has been there from the beginning, trying to perform this wide range of roles and seeing what more needs to be done. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of examples of resources that are available on our website that we have developed with partners at the start of the pandemic. One on the safety and well-being of the workforce, and another about innovation and adaptation during the pandemic. Our last State of the Social Service Workforce Annual Report endeavored to capture the main achievements of the workforce so far during the pandemic and highlight the main areas of learning for how the workforce has responded and innovated. These are all critical tools in the effort to build back better as the pandemic ends. We're currently at work on projects related to the social service workforce in schools and healthcare settings. And of course, we continue our involvement in child protection. Next slide, please. The social service workforce is well placed to respond to the impact of armed conflict, which includes trauma, loss of livelihoods, and displacement for millions. At the same time, climate crisis presents an immediate threat to the lives and livelihoods of many. And we know that the number of people affected and the complexity of the impact is increasing and will continue to do so. The workforce is learning to help families and communities adapt to these changes and be ready for more frequent and intense extreme weather events. In all of these situations, social service workers play a critical role. They are stakeholders, but they are often unrecognized in helping people and communities prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies. Critically, social service workers also help individuals and families and communities rebuild their resilience to withstand future shocks and reduce their risk of exposure and potential impact of future adverse events. Next slide, please. Violence against children is an ongoing global crisis that the social service workforce is particularly well placed to respond to and seek to prevent. I don't think I have to explain probably to this group what the elements of a well-functioning child protection system entails, but know that qualified social service workforce with a clear mandate to protect children is at the top of the list. Finally, it would be easy to go on much longer, but I want to conclude by saying I hope that I have helped to illuminate what a valuable stakeholder the social service workforce is. They've been on the front lines and they brought much to adaptation and innovation to help prepare for what the future brings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I appreciate that. And if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So next we'll be hearing from Dr. Hilary Weaver. Dr. Weaver is a professor and associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the School of Social Work, University of Buffalo State University of New York. Dr. Weaver is chair, CSW Board of Directors, IFSW Global Indigenous Commissioner, and president of the Indigenous and Tribal Social Work Educators Association. And she is joining us from Buffalo, New York. Dr. Weaver, through the framing of polishing the chain, will highlight co-building partnerships and relationality, sharing Indigenous examples regarding building back better from COVID and how we are all in this together. Welcome, Dr. Weaver.
Thank you so much. I am very happy to be here with all of you today. I am speaking to you from Onondaga territory, that's Western New York in the United States. So I want to make sure to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the lands where I sit. My topic for today is polishing the chain. And as I go through my remarks, I think that'll be a little more clear about what that means. It really does speak to strengthening the partnership so that we can move forward in a positive way. Next slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and how I happen to approach this topic. I am Lakota. I live in Haudenosaunee territory. So I've got this picture of me and my kids a number of years ago when they were much smaller than they are now. But we are traditional powwow dancers. We live our culture even as urban Indigenous peoples. Culture is very much the foundation of who we are. Being a social worker is also very much part of the foundation of who I am. So as I come to my remarks today, I think about what it means to be a social worker, and we have a number of guiding principles, one of which is crisis is an opportunity. So it's not just that there are difficult situations in the world, but there's a flip side to that. When there are difficulties, when there are challenges, there are also windows that open to us. There are doors that we can walk through. There are opportunities that we can seize. Social workers also recognize strength in each and every one of us.
Have to stop.
And I think I'm hearing somebody else speaking here, so I'll wait a minute. All right, I believe I'm good to go. So I'm going to go back to that strengths perspective that we embrace as social workers. So we don't just see the difficulties in the individual that we're trying to work with. We reach for those strengths. We emphasize the strengths. And as an Indigenous person, particularly as a Lakota, we often use the phrase "Mitakuye Oyashin." We are all related. And it means that we are connected to all elements of creation, to all other beings, but we're also partners. We are connected. We work in relationship. The global definition of social work draws on many different foundations of knowledge, and that includes Indigenous knowledge. So it's very compatible to come to social work as an Indigenous person. I did participate in the Global People's Summit just a few days ago. It started in such a strong, positive way with an amazing keynote speaker who reminded us to reach for the dream. Yes, there are many challenges, but he was actually referring to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his "I Have a Dream" speech, that yes, there are challenges, but we shouldn't get stuck there. We shouldn't get mired in that. We need to reach for that dream. And now I am going to say, let's go to that next slide, please. Because we're in this together. All of this fits together for me with a lot of symmetry. So the Global People's Summit, even in the theme, it's all about co-building. And when Rory spoke to us, he talked about this, co. We are in this together. That was emphasized in the summit. When Evelyn started us off today and she went through the SDGs, I really wanted to emphasize 17, because 17 is the thread that connects everything. It says that to achieve everything from our educational goals to gender equity to life in the water, we need to work in partnership. And that all fits together with Indigenous ideas of relationality. So all of this says we are in this together. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend a good part of my time speaking about a particular example, a Native American example during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in order for you to understand what those circumstances were like as we went through the pandemic, I do need to make sure that we have a common understanding of the history, because that's the foundation for where we are today. Sovereignty is always something that defined Indigenous peoples. We existed as peoples before anybody else came here. We have our own forms of governance, our own forms of educating people, our own health systems. So we exist as nations. Well, in the United States, or even before there was the United States, other nations came here to our territories and treaties were established. These are legal agreements between the nations that were already here and the nations that came. As Indigenous people, we always saw this as a sibling relationship, brother to brother or sister to sister. Many of the Europeans who came started to speak of that as the great white father, the government in Washington, and the wards of the state, the red children. We never saw that sort of hierarchy. We saw each other as equals. And so the treaties really commemorated how we would live together, how we would coexist, what we would give up, what we would retain, what we would be given. The picture that I have here on the left is of a wampum belt, and that's how the treaties were recorded here in the eastern parts of the United States. We often gave up things like land. In exchange, we got things like health services and education. That's the federal trust responsibility. That's the promise that the United States made to the Indigenous nations, that things like healthcare would be provided. We always believed that relationships take work. If you're in a marriage, it takes a lot of work. You don't just get married and you're all set. If you have a treaty, that takes work. So there is an annual commemoration here in New York State, in the United States, where we polish the chain. We work on our relationship. We renew our commitments to each other. That is polishing the chain. Next slide, please. Now, our partners have not always upheld their side of the bargain. They have not always done a good job of polishing the chain. Treaties were violated. The health infrastructure that we were supposed to have because of these treaties didn't really happen. And that set the stage for all sorts of health disparities. So when COVID came in, we were affected disproportionately. And there would be public health messages, COVID, wash your hands, stay safe. Well, if you don't have access to clean water, how in the world are you supposed to wash your hands? Many of the reservations don't have water in the homes or don't have electricity in the homes, or we couldn't social distance because of overcrowding. That infrastructure was not there for water and sanitation. That was a fundamental problem. And so places like the Navajo Nation had overwhelming numbers of COVID. At one point, higher rates of COVID than any state within the United States, and places like New York were hit pretty hard. But you also need to recognize and respect that we have our own Indigenous structures. We are not passive victims who just sat around waiting for the states to do something. we stepped up, we talked to each other, we shared information with each other, we responded, whether it's the youth, whether it's the elders, whether it's the women. Different people stepped up in different ways through our Indigenous structures. Next slide, please. Tribal nations responded to COVID. And remember, I talked about sovereignty and how we retained our ability to take care of ourselves. We filled gaps when states failed us. We communicated with each other. And where there wasn't an infrastructure, for example, on the Navajo Nation, it was very difficult to get the word out. That's the largest reservation in the United States. There is not much of a telecommunications infrastructure. Many reservations in the United States, things like cell phones don't work reliably. There is not reliable Wi-Fi or internet service. But what people had were radios. So the Native people developed public service announcements, not on a standard model of these brief spots that would work in other cultural communities, but some of these long messages in the language that people could hear. There were many webinars. We shared information with each other. We shared knowledge widely, and we communicated it within our context. So people up in the north were saying, stay one moose apart. That's how you define social distancing. In the Southwest, they're saying, stay 2 sheep apart. That's how you define social distancing. And because we had some of our own infrastructure, we were able to help others. Early in the pandemic, when vaccines were just starting to come out and they were not widely available, when tribes had them available, they shared from the beginning. The state of Washington, the tribal nations were vaccinating teachers, all kinds of teachers, so they could get back in the classroom. It didn't matter if they were Native. We had the capacity. We did this. We extended what we had to non-tribal citizens. The state of Oklahoma, many of those vaccinations were provided by the tribal nations because we had the resources. We could get the vaccines out there. We did that. Native Americans, by the way, are the most vaccinated people in the United States. We saw that crisis as an opportunity. I'd like to call your attention to this image in the bottom right-hand corner. Some of you may recognize that as the Hiawatha Belt, which is the symbol of how 5 different Indigenous nations came together to form the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And in particular, please notice that there are 2 small lines on either side of that. Those are hands extended in friendship. We are always open to partnerships, to helping others. So as I went to many of these webinars during the early days of the pandemic, I was actually a little shocked by the level of optimism and how many of our Indigenous leaders saw this as an opportunity to re-envision our healthcare systems. Because honestly, the healthcare systems in the United States often don't work for a lot of people. We can build better systems that honor sovereignty and really serve people if we partner together. Next slide, please.
I'm jumping in to give you that moment.
And I'm about to wrap up, so this is well timed. I want to emphasize we are in this together. It is necessary that we have an ongoing commitment. So we can't just say, oh, we have a health system, we're good. We got to keep working at it, and we work on it together. We have a shared world. I gave you an example that was primarily Indigenous, but we are in this world together. We are not in a vacuum. We must polish that chain. We must work together. That's really the essence of SDG 17. It's about partnership. Next slide, please. So I'm going to leave you with some questions. I want you to think about how can we all learn from how tribal nations responded to the pandemic? And how can Indigenous knowledge inform social work and other professions? And how can each and every one of us polish the chain? Thank you. And that was my final slide.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you. I did put one of your questions in the chat if folks would like to respond to that, to how can we polish the chain?
And thank you, Dr. Weaver. I have the privilege today of introducing our next speaker, and that is Evelyn Tomazeski. She is the assistant professor and MSW program director at George Mason University, the Department of Social Work in Virginia, and the IFSW North American Region representative to the United Nations. She is also the co-chair of the Global Mental Health Task Force for the Global Alliance for Behavioral Science, Behavioral Health, and Social Justice. Professor Tomazeski will highlight the framing by IFSW on the role of social workers in advancing a new eco-social world and reflect on today's presentation. It's all you.
Thank you so much. And I think so we have time for a few questions. I'll reflect by using this. This is from a policy statement recently written and published by IFSW, which I had the honor to be a part of with 3 other colleagues. The role of social workers in advancing a new eco-social world. And so just looking as you read these, I look at the one that the first that talks about the co-design and co-building of urgent global action to implement the 5 dimensions of sustainability. And we heard from Joachim about the idea of social justice and solidarity. And he spoke about the global commitment that is a global commitment that we make that also is respectful and reflects our cultures and our differing societies. And I think that's really important when we look at addressing and looking at global urgent action. The second is engaging governments and key stakeholders and all of our, I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my phone today. I don't know how to shut it off. Engaging key stakeholders. That's us right now on this webinar. Integrating the principles of the new eco-social world through social work education. And the fourth, transforming social protection systems from reactive to preventative systems. As you read that, I'd like you to think a little bit about what Kathy highlighted. She talked about how we can engage in micro, meso, and macro practices to co-build with our allies across professions and across communities. So giving a great overview of workforce, but also the diversity of that workforce and the diversity of communities that we work in. And on the next slide, we'll see the next 4 recommendations that came out of the policy. And the 5th one is addressing current historical injustices. And we just heard Hillary talk about examples of polishing the chain and the violations and historical disregard that calls upon all of us, if I was hearing, to really recognize and respect Indigenous cultures. And also the question that Hillary has posed to us, how can we work around polishing and supporting polishing the chain? Building partnerships and allies to work with local communities and collaboratively. Rory's brief overview and the link that you got, I received about the Global People's Summit and the Charter will really, I think, illuminate this, as does 7 and 8, the idea of visionary leadership of national associations, whatever that might be, whomever we're connected with, and really looking at things from a holistic human rights framework that really can build sustainability. So I think I'm not sure what the next slide is, but I think it goes to question and answers and our great question marks. Why don't we move to that and see what we have? And again, putting Hillary's question in there, certainly one, but I'd like to start with a question to our presenters. And it starts with the diversity of our audience today. We have an incredibly diverse audience. I will give a shout out to my cousins who logged on today and my friends, so thank you so much, who I know are not social workers or work in allied professions. So we still need to do much as social workers and as allies. What can we do And again, I think this connects to your question, Hillary. What can we do to really work towards an eco-social world, to really actualize the content of the charter? It's a very broad question, so please feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in briefly. And I would like to echo the case example that, excuse me, Joachim brought to us. He gave us an example of what we shouldn't do. It shouldn't be an outsider coming in with ideas about what needs to be done. To co-build a new eco-social world, we need to be good listeners. We need to be good partners. We need to be thoughtful. So don't come in with our own agenda. Come in as one person in the partnership to listen, maybe to be challenged. Maybe somebody has an idea that's very different than ours. But I think it all begins with listening so that we can really co-create rather than having any one person push their agenda.
Thank you. Kathy.
For me, I think much of the power in social work and all those who work in the social service arena, wherever they may work, their power lies in having been where it's happening. They know the stories and they can tell the stories. And we need to find ways to do that more widely and, support people to do that as effectively and get it to the right people. And I don't think we can really ever stop doing this, but it's a precious resource we have. We know the human experience in whether it's climate change, disaster, war, whatever it is. We have people who can tell those stories. And I think that's very compelling.
Thank you. Rory.
Well, first of all, Evelyn, I'm delighted that you have your cousins here with us, because one of the comments that came in the summit was we need to show this charter to our friends, to our family, to our communities, and see what they make of it. It's, the summit was fairly dominated by professional activists or professionals or those people, although there were huge and strong communities that directly engaged as well. But kind of the loudest voices, I think, were people who are sort of dedicated to the kind of sustainable change we all are, all of us in this meeting are. And I'm so happy to hear that you've brought your family in, because they will make sense of it. And how do they interpret it as non-professionals, assuming that they are? And what advice do they have for us? I think some really powerful messages came out of the summit on this question. This summit and the People's Charter represent a transfer of power away from powerful people and recognizing the power and the strengths that sit in communities. And within every community, there's power. There's community members that take responsibility for others in every single community, and recognizing that and working with that and engaging with that. And sometimes those are communities that some of us struggle with. And one of the really sort of things that I learned in the summit process was a reference from a South African activist who talked about something in the United States, a phenomenon. And he said, we've got to stop telling Trump supporters they're wrong. It doesn't work telling people that they're wrong.
Right.
When we tell people that they're wrong, all we do, he said, was polarize. And the more we say they're wrong, the stronger they become. The more convinced in their own mindset that we are wrong. And if telling people that they're wrong was a successful way to change the world, we would have changed the world a long time ago. And what he proposed instead was to engage with people and say, hey, we need to talk about this. Because what's happening from you, what's happening or what you're proposing doesn't work for us, but we want to work together. It was a huge challenge from a very prominent global South African activist to activism. And I don't think as social workers we're too strange to that, because we work with everybody and we have to find the beauty in everybody. That's part of our job. That's how we form relationships. And it never ever stops us from crossing an ethical boundary and maintaining our ethical approach. But it was a huge challenge from activism to activism. How do we engage people we have difference with? Shouting at them isn't working. And that's not to say, and I don't think this gentleman would say, that doesn't mean that we don't protest. We must say what we want, but to turn and point and say to the people, you are absolutely wrong, you are completely crazy, isn't the answer. The answer is, we need to work together. And another person said in response to this, who was from Britain, I don't agree with Brexit. I think Brexit is wrong. But we actually have to listen to what the issues that people who want Brexit are, and we have to sit down and talk with them. And that was another example. So I think those are things for us all to learn from and think about. You're muted there, right?
And I want to connect to that so deeply in that it's the idea of the very first social work class we teach is Paulo Freire's idea of finding that common space, that common place. And that middle, it might not feel middle ground to me, but it's moving more towards an agreement and moving forward. And I think that's a critically important skill that we have as social workers, is listening, reflecting, and finding that. Why it's the beauty of our micro, macro, meso practice and how that comes together and moving forward. Joaquim, I'd like to ask if you have any thoughts on that, or perhaps would be interested in talking more about or helping people understand just quickly in the last minute, the connection of collectivism and Ubuntu a little bit more.
Yeah, there's been this discussion actually that Ubuntu may not be applicable from the Western perspective. And I tend to want to disagree with that notion because as I indicated in my presentation, having been in South Korea and interacted with communities there, I realized that Ubuntu is actually, practiced even there, but of course in their own different ways. And again, I just want to reiterate the fact that Ubuntu is about a package. There's so many aspects within there, so many values within there. So we just have to pick the values and the aspects that that are applicable to our situation. And that is, I think, very important. And also, even when you unpack all the aspects that are embedded within the concept of Ubuntu, you find that there's so many other aspects that we as social workers actually have embraced. And those are some of the issues that we need to highlight and promote. So really, Ubuntu is beyond the aspect of community, collectivism. It's beyond all that. That's what I wanted to highlight.
Thank you. Before we just do a quick round robin, I don't know if that's even a word, to hearing from speakers and just a final reflection, I'd like to invite our participants to use the chat and share with us your final reflection, something you learned today, a takeaway from our presentation. So just putting that out there, perhaps we can start with Hillary, if you like, a final reflection, and then go to Rory, Kathy, Joaquim. Thank you.
I believe in dialogue, and I think this panel was a wonderful start. It is not the finish. It's not the conclusion. I look forward to connecting with people who were part of the audience. I look forward to connecting with people all over the world. because dialogue is how we're going to move forward in a positive way. And I'm very thankful to have been part of this today.
Thank you very much.
So I've got a donkey braying in the background, so that's what that noise might be if you hear it. The People's Summit and the Global People's Charter is going to continue, and we all need to continue to be involved. The challenge is to localize it. The challenge is for communities to take ownership, to feel that it's their charter. And remember, it's a living document, so it can be adapted and it can be changed as that discussion unfolds. But the commitment is there from all the people that have been a part of the process. It's there from the United Nations as well. And so I guess we're all challenged with this responsibility. It doesn't matter what our network is, our professional network, our community, the people that live in our building blocks, the neighbors, the people we have, a coffee with. Not necessarily to take the charter and put it down their throat, but to help localize examples. What can we do in this community? How can this community start to address some of the issues? Who does that message need to go to? Who needs to hear those? How can we facilitate a discussion? That's the localization of this process, which we so need. And I just so look forward to hearing all of the other examples besides the ones that the speakers have said tonight, which will be great as we go forward and we share and learn. Thanks. Been a wonderful panel. Thank you so much. And good.
Kathy? And we're going to unmute you if you could.
I thought I could get through one presentation without doing that. I really appreciated and learned from today's discussion. And it does make me think about my circles of influence. Where can I take it? How can I, keep moving it along? And it's not just in professional roles. It is, as Roy says, with our families and certainly in our communities. So thank you, panel. I appreciate all that I learned today.
Thank you. And I want to send a special shout out to Linda Levin, MSW, and Victoria McMahon, GTA, for the planning and putting the behind the scenes work and getting us all together. I think my takeaway is, yes, let's keep this conversation going. Yes, we will share this. Let's make a commitment to look at the People's Charter, to absorb and to really find that common journey. I really am so excited. I think if we can all go off mic, but certainly go a round of applause, and there's heart emojis on the screen, and anyone wants to come off mic to say hello, whatever, you're welcome to. But thank you so much to the panel for joining us whatever time zone you're in today. So be well.